to introduce and welcome our first speaker of the day, who probably needs no introduction to our audience because of his international recognition and his work and, I guess, foundations to many programs and practices in terms of gifted education and talent development here in Australia. He, of course, is a recognised world leader in gifted education and talent development, Professor François Gagné. He will be speaking to us today from Montreal, Canada, and it's really, really exciting to have him online with us. If we can't have him in person, the next best thing is to have him online. Professor Gagné has benefited from 3 opportunities for academic acceleration, an early entrance to school and 2 class skips. He completed his BA degree in psychology in 14 years instead of 17, followed by his master's degree in 1962. After obtaining his PhD in psychology at the Université de Montreal, Professor Gagné devoted the first decade of his career to setting up and directing a major research and intervention program within the bilingual Quebec system of colleges. The subject of that program was the evaluation of teaching by students. It was called SPOT, Student Perceptions of Teaching in English. His entrance at the Université du Québec à Montréal in 1978 was the occasion for a major career reorientation, namely the choice of talent development, gifted education, as his new teaching and research focus. He devoted the rest of his academic career in the Department of Psychology, namely over 2 decades, to that field. Even after his official retirement in 2001, he has pursued his research and publication activities, as well as numerous international speaking tours. He has gained his international renown mostly through his theory of talent development, the differentiating model of giftedness and talent, the DMGT, which we're all likely very familiar with. Professor Gagné has received many prestigious professional prizes, including the Distinguished Scholar Award in 1996 from the National Association of Gifted Children, the NAGC in the USA, the International Award for Research in 2021 from the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children, as well as the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2022 from the Mensa Education and Research Foundation in the USA. Please join me in welcoming our most distinguished first speaker, Professor François Gagné, for his session titled My Professional Legacy Concerning Academic Talent Development. Thank you, Professor Gagné.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Michelle. Very, very kind of you, even though it makes me so old looking at these past things. And now, good morning to all participants to this webinar this morning for you. As I am talking to you from Montreal, just before my Wednesday evening meal, the miracles of modern technology erase in the blink of an eye the 15-hour delay that separates Montreal from Brisbane, and probably other hours from all the people from other regions outside and inside Australia. It's almost incredible. You know, in spite of my advanced age, I am just like a child in front of a new toy, fascinated by a technology that was totally inexistent when I first visited Australia in 1991, almost 35 years ago. Now that my mobility has decreased, I can speak to you from my office, my feet in my slippers, needing just a nice shirt and tie to appear professional. As you see, the title of my presentation announces a legacy. Indeed, I have reached the venerable age of 84 years and been involved for more than 45 of them in the field of talent development. Commonly, but incorrectly called gifted education. It's not the education that's gifted, it's the students. I am well aware that my professional career is coming to an end. This presentation aims to pinpoint some of the main ideas that I have fought for during that period of almost 5 decades. I made an inventory of the themes most important to my heart, 9 of them, just enough to maintain a slow pace through the next 50 minutes or so. The first 4 themes focus on the differentiating model of giftedness and talent, or the MGT, the theory of talent development that has brought me international recognition. The more practical second half will address the modalities of proper talent development in education. I discuss all these themes in more detail in a recently published book entitled Differentiating Giftedness from Talent. It is available on the Amazon website. I consider this book as the synthesis, the Bible of my professional productivity. Let's start by focusing on my conceptual framework, the DMGT. The most important word is differentiating, and the meaning of this concept will be the subject of my first theme. I chose talent development as my field of study in the late 1970s. As I read the work of major thinkers in the field, I quickly discovered that I was entering a conceptually chaotic world. Here are some examples. First, I noticed the diversity of definitions for the term giftedness. This concept was a real catch-all for scholars around the world. Secondly, I observed that most authors almost ignored the term talent in their professional writings. The terms giftedness, gifted children, gifted education monopolize the terminology. In fact, just like they do now. Thirdly, scholars use the term giftedness to represent at the same time high intellectual potential and outstanding academic achievement. In fact, the identification procedures for gifted students maintained this confusion by often combining IQ scores, the potential, and academic performance measures, the achievement. In short, in my eyes, it was a veritable Tower of Babel. Through these readings, the idea of differentiating potentialities from achievements rapidly imposed itself. Here is a summary of my arguments. My starting point is a well-known slogan: develop your full potential. You've seen that everywhere. This slogan expresses a reality that we all acknowledge intuitively, namely that we all possess a diversity of potentialities, which we will transform more or less completely into achievements. I chose this slogan for another very important reason. In its Universal Declaration of the Rights of the Child, the United Nations chose this message to identify the primary mission of educational institutions worldwide. Here is Article 29. The education of the child shall be directed to the development of the child's personality, talents, and mental and physical abilities to their fullest potential. In concrete terms, I adopted the concept of aptitude to represent the idea of potentiality. What are aptitudes? I define them as naturally developed abilities. I oppose them to competencies, which correspond to systematically developed abilities or skills. For example, intellectual aptitudes are a set of naturally developed cognitive abilities that students, in fact all children, use daily as their main tool to acquire academic competencies. Higher intelligence will allow for an easier and faster learning of these competencies. Aptitudes have important genetic roots, while competencies appear through the learning environment. It is because of this genetic anchoring that I chose giftedness to represent outstanding aptitudes, reserving the term talent for outstanding competencies and skills. You are certainly aware or familiar with the phenomenon of underachievement. It is defined as a discrepancy between expected performance, the aptitude level, and actual performance, the competencies. Well, gifted underachievement is a perfect concretization of the DMGT. It represents giftedness without talent. Now, let me show you the visual summarization of the DMGT. This is the version I use down under, in the southern hemisphere. Well, maybe you prefer will be more comfortable with the one for the northern hemisphere. Here it is. First note, the two differentiating poles, the aptitudes component on the left and the competencies component on the right. These two poles anchor a central component at the bottom, the developmental process through which students transform their aptitudes into competencies. These three components of the DMGT form the basic trio of the developmental dynamic. Developing one's full potential means maximizing the effectiveness of this learning process. In the case of academic talents, top right, the relevant aptitudes essentially belong to the intellectual domain at left. The DMGT has two additional components in the middle, intrapersonal and environmental catalysts, which I will introduce in a few minutes. Well, over the course of my career, I have been interviewed dozens of times by the media in several countries. I soon discovered that journalists usually ask the same two initial questions. First, what is giftedness? And second, how many are there? My second theme aims to answer the second question. You may have noticed at the top of the figure that I have quantified giftedness and talent. The access threshold I have chosen is the upper 10% of a reference population, both for aptitudes at left and for competencies at right. Why this choice of top 10%? Well, the answer could be very long. I will limit myself here to 4 brief observations, but you will find in my book a complete chapter on this subject. 1. This is a question that my colleagues largely leave aside. I really am the only one, I believe, in Gifted Ed to discuss it in detail. Yet, this is a very important issue, not just because of journalists' curiosity, but from a scientific as well as a practical point of view. I explain that in detail in my book. 2. There is no absolute answer, no magic number to the question, how many are there? In fact, it is the same for all the thresholds we use in our societies, like speed limits, retirement age, overweight or obesity thresholds, wealth or poverty thresholds, etc. In short, all these thresholds are conventions. That is the result of a consensus between specialists. 3. Most psychologists and educators keep using a threshold of top 2% for intellectual giftedness, namely an IQ of 130 or more. Well, it was proposed a century ago. I believe the time has come in talent development to question the elitism of that threshold, which relegates 98% of the population to oblivion. Ask yourself, are young people who learn easily and quickly really so few in number? 2%? Come on. 4. It is precisely in reaction to this elitism that I have chosen a 4-tier system called MB for metric-based. with a minimum entry threshold of top 10%, as you saw in the figure. This threshold allows me to multiply by 5, no less, the population of those labeled gifted or talented. The three other levels are respectively top 1%, very gifted or talented, top 1 in 1,000, exceptionally gifted or talented, and top 1 in 10,000, extremely gifted or talented. The MB system is simple, it is clear, and above all, it is generous. My third theme combines the first two to examine the practical impact in education of the differentiation between giftedness and talent. As mentioned earlier, cognitive aptitudes are the preferred tool for acquiring academic competencies. It follows that intellectually gifted students have a better chance of acquiring an outstanding number of competencies and thus of being judged academically talented. But as we well know, not all gifted students are talented, and vice versa. If the gifted and talented populations overlap only partially, what is the percentage of that overlap? This figure shows three possible answers. Let's look at it more closely. I will just take a little drink. The blue circles at the top represent the intellectually gifted group in an average school, labeled GI, gifted. They belong to the top 10% in terms of their IQ, which, by the way, is a very good measure of intellectual aptitudes. The red circles at the bottom represent the top 10% in terms of academic achievement. Those I call the academically talented. Together, the two circles represent the total population of gifted or talented students. The or is important here. The gifted blue and the talented red. The purple zone of intersection in the middle represents the subgroup of students who are both gifted and talented. So recall my question about the percentage of overlap. Of all the gifted or talented people, the blue and red circles, how many are simultaneously gifted and talented, the central purple zone? As you see in the figure, we have three possible answers, which I offer. 20% at left, 50% in the middle, and 70% at right. Because of the strong correlation between IQ scores and school achievement measures, most educators spontaneously choose the 70% at right. They believe that most gifted students are also talented. But within the conceptual framework of the DNGT, that response is wrong. Indeed, research has shown that the real answer is the 20% at left, not even the 50% in the middle. It's the 20% at left. In my book, I discuss in detail this surprising result. So let's look at it more closely. Keep in mind that these two circles represent the total population of gifted and or talented students. About 40% of them are gifted, but not talented. Their achievements are below the top 10% threshold. Can be high, but below the threshold. Another 40% belong to the talented group, but their cognitive aptitudes place them below the giftedness threshold of top 10%. They can be close, but they are not within that threshold. Thus, only the 20% purple subgroup of these gifted or talented students can be simultaneously labeled gifted and talented. So these figures confirm the importance of differentiating between giftedness and talent. They overlap much less than commonly thought. Much more could be said about this differentiation, but time forces me to move on. My fourth theme looks at the dynamics of talent development, and I will introduce it with a question. Why is there so little overlap between cognitive aptitudes and academic performance? Well, the answer is simple, and the DMGT figure illustrates it very well. Individual differences in academic competencies result from the combined influence of four groups of causal factors: the cognitive aptitudes, the component G at left, a long-term learning process, component D at the bottom center, and the constant influence, sometimes positive and sometimes negative, of two groups of catalysts, intrapersonal and environmental components I and E top center. Note the arrows illustrating these influences, which go into the development process. These four causal agents play different roles. Let's focus on the acquisition of academic competencies. Here, cognitive aptitudes enable the acquisition of the knowledge and skills specific to the various subjects that make up a school curriculum. Component D becomes the mediating agent in the transformation of aptitudes into competencies or of gifts into talents. Its main subcomponent, you can see it bottom right, is investment, called DI, namely active engagement in the learning tasks in the form of attention, concentration, effort, and so forth. The I and E catalysts in the middle of the figure directly influence. Technically, we say they moderate the developmental process, and consequently, they, they influence the quantity and quality of learning. For example, a number of personal characteristics can influence the degree to which students are engaged in their studies, just such as their fluctuating level of interest for the various subjects, the presence of personality disorders, their level of tenacity when facing obstacles, their degree of autonomy, their level of determination to bring their projects to full completion, and so on. At the environmental level, the quality and pace of teaching, the classroom climate, parental support, and many, many other factors will help or hinder academic progress. Time does not permit me to explore these dynamics in detail, but my book devotes 4 chapters to them. Well, I hope that despite this brief overview, you realize the multiplicity and complexity of the developmental scenarios generated by these 5 components, with their 20 or so subcomponents and their countless more specific facets. This has led me to summarize talent development as follows. Each talent results from complex individual choreographies involving a multitude of fluctuating interactions between all components and subcomponents of the DMGT. This sentence implies that all talents are equally valuable, regardless of the developmental scenario followed by learners. That is, even if that scenario does not include the presence of intellectual giftedness. Okay. Now, to complete this first part, I had prepared 2 other themes around the DMGT. One on the role of genetics in the emergence of aptitudes, and the other on the importance of chance in the progression of talent. But the lack of time forced me to set them aside. Well, almost. So as a closing comment for this this more theoretical section, I have retained just one quote that sums up these 2 themes. All human accomplishments can be ascribed to two crucial throws of the dice, over which no individual exerts any personal control. This is what John Atkinson said, oh, almost 50 years ago. Note that the genetic background, which is unfortunately, excuse me, I made a little mix-up. A first role determines an individual's heredity, and the other is formative environment. Note that the genetic background, which is unfortunately too often underestimated by professionals in the human sciences, will influence the elements within component G, the aptitudes, and also component I, intrapersonal catalysts, personality components, while the second role, the one of chance, will act on the elements of component E, environmental catalysts. So, if you have found yourself in the right place at the right time, please remain modest because, in a significant way, you are simply the recipient of your gifts, your temperament, and your family environment. So, this concludes the first part of my talk. Let's move on to the second, more applied part of my legacy, devoted to the implementation of a real academic talent development ATD program. ATD for Academic Talent Development. The first two themes I will talk about of this more applied second part will deal with the rationale, the why of an academic talent development program. The other four will describe the how, the modalities of implementation. I have chosen as my opening theme the first and most important law of learning. Few people know it, but it is the most important law of learning. Okay, imagine any cohort of young students entering first grade. Okay? As you observe their school learning over the following months and years, you will observe two phenomena. Firstly, all these pupils will progress in their mastery of the local curriculum, meaning that the competencies of the group as a whole will grow fairly steadily from month to month and year to year. In fact, school curricula have been designed to adjust more or less to the learning pace of average students. Secondly, individual students will progress at different paces, some of them a little or a lot slower than average, and others a little or a lot faster than average. In short, there are very few truly average students. It is this dual phenomenon of group growth, accompanied by significant individual differences, that many researchers refer to as the first law of learning. Others call it the fan spread effect. This figure, here it is, illustrates the fan spread effect. It shows school years horizontally and curriculum years vertically. The blue diagonal confirms the cohort's steady progression, one curriculum year for each year of schooling, more or less. After 8 years, most students worldwide have mastered to a large extent the 8 years of their local curriculum. At the same time, the widening of the funnel that creates the fan spread effect illustrates the impact of individual differences and hence the dispersion of competence levels. The slower students, the pink zone, fall further and further behind the core of the cohort, and vice versa for the faster ones, those in the green zone. Okay? Note also significant differences within each color subgroup. They range from slightly slower 7 years of curriculum master in 8 years, the pale pink, to very slow, only 4 years of mastery, deep pink, and vice versa from 8 years of curriculum in 7 school years. How do you say that? Pale green to 8 years of curriculum in 4 school years, deep green. Note that the extreme values of this range show a 4-to-1 pace ratio. The fastest learners are twice as advanced as the average, while the slowest learners are progressed twice as slowly. That's the 4-in-1 pace ratio. Well, I'm sure that you can all think of students whose progress is twice as slow as normal. For example, students who reach the normal entry age for high school without having adequately mastered basic literacy and numeracy skills. These very slow learners do not go unnoticed. Indeed, they receive lots of special support. But you perhaps raise an eyebrow when I mention the possibility of a pathway twice as fast as normal. Complete elementary school in 3 years instead of 6? For many of you, it does not seem to make sense. Well, it does. I know, for example, a Quebec student, well, more than one now, 2 or 3 of them, who went through the 11 years of the Quebec elementary and high school system just in 6 years, almost twice the regular pace. And there are many more like her and him in every country. Unfortunately, there are very few such academic prodigies because, as we will see below, school systems worldwide discourage accelerated progression. On the other hand, if you consider that many more young people do so in arts and sports, it is clear that thousands of students around the world could do the same academically, if given a chance. Well, the fan spread effect looks great in theory, but we all know that the reality of our school systems is very different. For example, the green zone of the fan spread is virtually non-existent in any country. Why is this? Quite simply, because its manifestation is subject to one important condition. The learning pace must be open. What does open mean? It means that there must be no barriers to individual progression. This allows learners to progress at their own pace, whether fast or slow, thus maximizing the fan spread effect. Where do we find the best applications of the fan spread effect? Well, you know, it's primarily in sports, where the development of athletes' full potential is strongly encouraged and supported. It is also the case in arts, particularly in music. That's why we see so often musical prodigies, young people who achieve professional mastery of their instrument before reaching adolescence. This is another example of a pace at least twice as fast as average. Well, as I said, open learning means no barriers to the pursuit of maximal personal paces of learning. Yet, education systems the world over have been built around 2 main obstacles to that personal pace. First, there is the age grade lockstep. Almost all students progress by 1 degree per year, whatever their spontaneous learning pace. The progression of the vast majority of students thus straddles the blue diagonal. They have no choice. There are very few grade skippers, and also as few repeaters as possible. In the province of Quebec, for example, the normal age grade lockstep pace affects 90% of all elementary school students. It's probably the same in your country. Those who stick to the diagonal whether they like it or not. And the remaining 10% is overwhelmingly made of repeaters. As for accelerants, most of the students in this minuscule 1% owe their advance to the Quebec program for early entrance at age 5 or 6. After that, forget about grade skipping. Doesn't exist, but almost never. So to all intents and purposes, the fan spread effect, especially in its green part, is virtually non-existent. And yet, many thinkers, starting with Aristotle, have stated unequivocally, there is no greater injustice than to treat unequal individuals equally. Well, the age grade lockstep is compounded by a second blockage, which is the pace adopted by teachers in their classrooms. According to some US studies, teachers mainly target students performing at around the 40th percentile, which means clearly below the group average. Why that slow pace? It is to ensure the success, or should I say, the lockstep progression of as many students as possible. What happens to the students in the green zone? I'm not just pointing at the top 10% labeled talented, but also at the 20 to 30% of students who achieve well above average. This significant minority of students spends a large part of their time in class twiddling their thumbs. And what's more, they will waste even more times since they will only progress by one grade the following year. Well, the lack of a true fan spread effect in educational systems around the world in no way signifies a lack of above average competencies. Rather, it means that our school systems do not offer learning conditions that are likely to create challenges and to stimulate the students' motivation and volition. In so doing, they completely fail in their fundamental mission, namely to enable all their students and each one of them to achieve their full potential. Unfortunately, it's the talented students, those who make up our target clientele, those in the green zone, who are the main victims. What a sad observation. In conclusion, if there is one fact that perfectly clarifies the why of an ATD program, it is not only this increasing spread of academic competencies over the months and years in all cohorts of students, but above all, the almost exclusive focus of teachers' interventions on students in the pink zone. How can we correct this profound inequity against talented students who are prevented from developing their full potential? Given the sheer number of such students, appropriate solutions can only be systemic. They must focus on group programs rather than apply individual clinical interventions in different classes. Indeed, the clinical approach can only offer a few drops of help in an ocean of needs. Now, let's talk about the conceptual framework of a true ATD. The educational philosophy that would guide that program. It would be based on a profound respect for individual differences in learning pace, as manifested in the fan spread effect. Such respect can be found in the writings of an American educational philosopher, the late Professor Elliot Eisner from Stanford University. Here are two short excerpts from his ideas on appropriate learning conditions for all students, including the usually neglected talented ones. First, The kind of schools we need would not hold as an ideal that all students get to the same destinations at the same time. The 8th grade lockstep. Individuals come into the world with different aptitudes, and over the course of their lives, they develop different interests and proclivities. And the other one is, in an ideal approach to educational practice, each youngster would learn at an ideal rate. Over time, the cumulative gap between students would grow. Students would travel at their own optimum rates, and some would go faster than others in different areas of work. In these short quotes, we have a clear description of a fan spread effect perfectly applied to all learners, both the slow pinks and the fast greens. Let's now focus on our special group of talented students. How should we structure their school activities to help them develop their mental and physical abilities to their fullest potential, as stipulated in Article 29 of the UN Declaration quoted at the beginning of my talk? In a well-received article I published some years ago, I propose 7 constituent elements of a true academic talent development program. For the purposes of this presentation, I have selected the 4 most important ones. The first 2 focus on that program's curriculum, while the other 2 deal with administrative modalities. The first constituent element is the keystone of a good ETD program. Remember that it is the keystone of the program. It targets the enrichment of the curriculum. I am targeting here the regular curriculum offered by any local school system. The concept of enrichment is akin to the fashionable and more politically correct concept of curriculum differentiation. Could you advance the slides a little bit? Yeah, one more. Here we are. But the term differentiation used here is imprecise. It has many different meanings because the concept of differentiation covers all students with special needs. The term enrichment is much more relevant in the case of high-achieving and talented students because it identifies a type of differentiation especially adapted to their rapid learning pace. And I know that enrichment is not very politically correct, but I'm old and I'm used to it, and I think it's a wonderful term to talk about what should be offered to talented students. Anyway, I describe in that article 4 types of curricular enrichment. By far the most important is enrichment in density, also called condensation or compacting of the curriculum. It involves, you guessed it, accelerating the pace of content coverage across subject matters. Why give it priority over other forms of enrichment? Quite simply, because it offers the most relevant response to the key characteristic of talented students, their ease and speed in learning. Did you know, for example, that research has shown that almost 50% of the students in a typical classroom, yes, almost half of them, can, on the very first day of the school year, pass with success the exam they will be given at the end of that year? Yeah, of course, they will all improve their competencies during that school year. But do these fast learners really need 10 months to acquire the unmastered competencies? Well, to ask the question is to answer it. Consider also that enrichment in density helps to correct the most acute problem that these students experience, the daily boredom caused by a teaching pace that is clearly too slow for them. Numerous evaluation studies have clearly demonstrated this sad phenomenon of boredom. Well, the second constituent element flows directly from the first. It is based on the fact that talented students do not demonstrate their rapid learning pace episodically, but vary every single day. Therefore, appropriate enrichment must provide intellectual challenges on a daily basis in all subjects taught. The concept of proximal zone of development proposed by Lev Vygotsky aptly reflects this necessity to keep students' learning pace at the cutting edge of their aptitudes and interests. Now we go to the two administrative aspects. This need for the constant curriculum enrichment of students in the green zone will constitute a real challenge for teachers. And the challenge will grow over time as the competence gap within this group widens. And yet, this is an essential condition for the full development of these students' potentialities. Indeed, the presence of a wide range within the green zone will be the best proof that the school system has achieved its mission of developing the full potential of its students. Okay, I repeat, the presence of a wide range within the green zone will be the best proof that the school system has achieved its mission of developing the full potential of its students. In the case of the slower students in the pink zone, the challenge is quite different. Their difficult progress, often combined with behavioral problems, forces teachers to prioritize their needs. In other words, school systems consider far more important to minimize individual differences within the pink zone than to increase them within the green zone. That's their priority. Because of the social pressures on teachers to maximize their slower students' progress, this is a very understandable decision. Anyway, it will be said, the talented students will manage very well. Aren't they, in fact, far ahead of the average cohort, and even further ahead of the less competent students? That is true, I admit, but will they achieve their full potential? The answer is no. And this choice of priorities very aptly describes the daily life of students in heterogeneous regular classrooms worldwide. Major evaluative studies, notably in the United States and Australia, have revealed the almost total absence in elementary classrooms of enrichment activities that specifically target high-achieving students. So the conclusion is therefore inescapable. The pressures exerted by the less competent students in the pink zone leave no free time for teachers to plan and offer genuine enrichment in density. As Tom Cruise would say, mission impossible. So hence the third constituent element of a true ATD, ability-based grouping. Is this an effective solution? Yes, without hesitation, as several studies have shown. But this effectiveness depends on one important condition, the regular presence of enrichment in density. Grouping is not an end in itself, but a means to proper enrichment. Ability grouping is also an efficient solution as it allows schools to place in these groups specially trained teachers. Well, the fourth and final characteristic targets a set of administrative modalities whose virtues I have been proclaiming since the beginning of my entry into this field. Yeah, How can we reconcile, on the one hand, the disparity in learning paces that the fan spread effect illustrates, and on the other, the age grade lockstep that the school system imposes on students? Academic acceleration offers a perfect solution to this dilemma. The various accelerative modalities smoothly ensure the continuity of enrichment in density. Indeed, once the current school year's program has been mastered through compacting, often several weeks or even months before the end of the school year, what could be more logical than to begin the following year's curriculum, rather than occupy the students' free time with various types of enrichment in diversity, totally unrelated to the curriculum? And this access to the more advanced curriculum leads very quickly to a progression through the grades, e.g., grade skipping or merge grades. You may think that only a handful of students can benefit from an accelerated approach, but it is far from true. Let me give you an example. Here is a question I have asked dozens of times to groups of teachers in several countries, including Australia, so many times. Imagine an elementary school system with 6 grade levels. How many of the students entering grade 1 do you think could complete this elementary course in 5 years without any additional effort, simply by reducing the time lost? What would be your estimate? 10%? 15, 20%? Closer to 25 or 30? Even more than 30%? Well, if we could have time, we could have a show of hands and everything, but unfortunately we do not. Well, the median answer I got year after year was around 25%, about 1 in 4 students. In short, a quarter of the school population loses at least a year in elementary school because of the age grade lockstep I mentioned earlier. 1 student in 4. Moreover, if that many students could save a year, how many of them could save a second year of lost time? Think about it. Unfortunately, most accelerating measures meet with strong resistance from a majority of administrators, teachers, and even parents. They ignore or they refuse to accept the overwhelming scientific evidence in favor of all forms of accelerated enrichment. A good friend of mine, Professor James Borland, elegantly summed up this conundrum when he asserted, acceleration is one of the strangest phenomena in the field of education. I can think of no other issue in which there is such a gulf between what research has revealed and what most practitioners believe. The research on acceleration is so uniformly positive, the benefits of appropriate acceleration so unequivocal, that it is difficult to see how an educator could oppose it. Visit my website and you will find several downloadable documents on this little known gem, a real gem. Okay, let's conclude. Let me conclude this presentation with 9 testamentary bequests in the form of recommendations. It's bizarre to think that I'm making testamentary bequests. Anyway, I'm old. Okay. 1. Aim to develop every student's full potential. Remember, this is the fundamental mission of every educational system. Distinguish giftedness from talent. Remember that gifted and talented students make up, at best, only 20% of the population of gifted or talented students. 3, avoid the elitism of the top 2%. In our schools, many more young students than a meager 2% achieve excellence and demonstrate a need for faster progression than average. 4, focus on talent. The science is clear. Excellence in present accomplishments is the best predictor of future success, whether accompanied or not by intellectual giftedness. 5, integrate all components. Between them, components D, development, I, intrapersonal, and E, environmental, exert a greater causal influence than giftedness alone on the emergence of academic talent. 6, maximize the fan spread effect. Well, that's a tough one. The regular progression of the group and the growth of individual differences sums up the first and most important law of all learning. The expansion of the fan spread effect is the best indicator of the maximum development of each learner's potentialities. 7, prioritize enrichment in density. This daily, I repeat, daily modification of the regular curriculum is the keystone of any true academic talent development program, as it perfectly meets the need for faster progression felt by a majority of talented and high-achieving students. 8, promote ability-based grouping. The homogeneous grouping of high achievers is the most effective and also efficient administrative measure to ensure true enrichment in density. And I am well aware, saying this, that I am going against a very popular construct called inclusion. But I talk about that in my book, and I do not have time here to discuss it. And finally, implement academic acceleration. This underrated administrative gem ensures the continuity of enrichment in density across grade levels. If you are curious to learn more, here are 2 suggestions: my website and emailing me. Don't hesitate to do so. I am completed. I sincerely thank you for your attention. And I especially say hello to Rosemary Cathcart, a good friend whom I've not seen for many years. Hope we will send an email very soon. Good day to you.
Thank you, Professor François Gagné. That was absolutely sensational. Please join me, everybody, in thanking François for that fantastic legacy presentation. There are a couple of messages in the chat that people wanted you to keep talking, and I've very much enjoyed hearing from you today, and it has been such a privilege, so thank you.
It was my pleasure.
We're now going to move into our Q&A session, so I'll invite the audience members to post any queries they have for Professor Gagné in the Q&A function, and I'll read those out to you, François, one by one, and I'll let you have some time to respond to those. If any come up that you kind of like, oh, I can't respond to that at the moment, and you need a bit more thinking time, please, let us know at a later date.
Email me. Just
okay.
Email me, will be a pleasure. Especially since now I realize as years go by that my fluency in English is slowly decreasing, and I feel a bit more uncomfortable having to talk spontaneously. I do it, but it's not as good as if you send me a good question. I will take time. I'm retired.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Really appreciate that. And we did not notice any difference at all in your English proficiency. So our first question A biggie, probably. How has the field of gifted education or talent development changed over time? So we've got to this point in your career that you're now looking at your legacy. So what are the changes that you've seen in that time?
My simple answer is zero. It was a sad conclusion in my book. In the epilogue at the end, I just say, I've been fighting for 45 years just to have the differentiation between giftedness and talent recognized so that people would talk separately about potentialities and about achievements. Look at everything that is published right now or in the last few years, and you will find the same confusion about the word giftedness as being representing either one or the other. And it's the same. Try to find a clear definition of talent somewhere in the recent publications. The only one you'll find is in my work. So again, all we see is gifted education, gifted children, gifted this, but the most important ones are the talented. And those talented students are not necessarily, in fact, they are not in majority intellectually gifted. So this is my observation, in fact. There is, it's the same. I mean, what you call gifted education remains, how do you say that, on the side of the road, you know, something that is not given a central recognition.
Sidelined.
Yes, the sideline.
Thank you. We have a question. It's got a bit of a lead in, so I'll read it to you. At my current site, we offer acceleration, compaction, and learner readiness groupings across our curriculum. We view acceleration as a learning intervention, yeah, and the notion of students having a jagged learning profile. However, our parent community do not view acceleration as a learning intervention. Instead, they view acceleration as a social status and something to be won. How can we support our community in understanding acceleration is a learning intervention?
Well, it's hard for me to answer that. Whoop, the question has disappeared. I was looking at it. I mean, you call that as something to be won, right? A kind of, you win the right to, if you start by introducing acceleration as something integral to the structure of the school or even the school district, well, it might take a few years, but it will suddenly become acknowledged that, well, acceleration is part of daily life. Let me come back to my example. You know, I've been asking that question for so many years. And I said to the people to whom I was presenting the question, email me if you try it. I've never received a single answer. And I look forward for the fact that someday in a given school, somewhere, they will create a subgroup of students who will do their elementary school in 1 year less, and leaving the place for those within that group to students who could even accelerate a bit further. You know, it will be part of the system. I know that there will be pressures from some parents, you know, to have their child be in that group or another group. These, I mean, I'm not good at these things. This is, this is day-to-day administrative task, but just try it once, and then it will become part of the system, and we will have many elementary schools offering that possibility to their students.
Yeah, thank you for your sage advice on that one. Our second question, I'm interested in your point about maximizing the fan spread effect. Is the idea that we should move students in the green zone at a faster pace and not worry too much if students in the pink need to move slower?
No, I mean, no, I'm not saying that. I mean, again, each student must be able to work to progress at his or her own pace. Presently, what we see is that the students who are given the most attention are those in the pink zone. I don't know how it is. I mean, it's everywhere. So not to worry too much if students in the pink zone to move slower. I don't know how there's an error. Anyway, not worry. Well, we do worry. Everyone does worry. It's just that this worry is given the major role, the central role in school policies. And as I said, those high achieving students will be considered as, well, you know, they achieve so well anyway. So they won't receive the possibility to progress at their own pace. But it's not saying that the pink ones won't be given any attention. If you activate ability grouping, then all your students in the pink zone will be receiving all the attention they need, and probably even more. And those students who can accelerate will be receiving a possibility to go faster.
So in essence, the idea fits in with inclusive education is for all students.
It's for all students, but each student has an environment that will maximize his or her or their possibilities of moving at their own speed.
Yeah. Great, thank you. The next question. Do you have any suggestions for inspiring fellow teachers and leadership to get on board with promoting talent development?
No. I tried all kinds of things. It's a huge challenge, promoting talent development. I mean, within a, you know, those questionnaires, you know, the OGE, the opinions about gifted education that I've created and has been used everywhere. You know, you can see that within the teacher community, there are people who are quite against any attention to talented students. In fact, for them, it's each minute you give them is a minute you take out of those students in the pink zone. So, and for others, it's more indifference. And those few, well, who are quite active and would like to see change, well, they have, how would you say that? A road that goes, you know, vertically. How do you say that? You know, it's not flat country. I mean, they have a hill to escalate if they want to win something. You see, my English is not very good anymore. Okay, so to get on board, I would love to have suggestions, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge for all of those who are actually here today participating, who are, I imagine, quite won immediately to the idea, but they are the minority.
Yeah, thank you.
Have you seen an example? Oh,
sorry.
Yeah, I was looking at the next one.
Yes, yes. So our next question.
Yeah.
Have you seen examples of a true ATD in different school systems around the world? If so, where and who?
I saw one example. That was, I mean, I was in Hungary. What's the capital of Hungary?
Budapest?
Yeah, it was in Budapest. And I was giving a presentation exactly on this subject. I mean, that was years ago. And at the end, a small group of people came to see me and said, we have this school. I think it was in Sweden, but I'm not sure. It wasn't, let's say, yeah, Scandinavia somewhere. And they had this school, and they said, we have applied all 7 of your principles. And probably some more, I imagine. But there are so few of them. No, that's the one case I was presented with.
Yeah.
But
Did
there
they,
are,
did they,
yeah,
sorry, did they give you any like insight as to how they went about doing that? Was it like take a long time? Was it, an organic kind of thing, or did it, what was the progression? How did they go about doing it? Did they give you any idea?
no. Well, wait, it was a 5-minute talk, after a
Oh, okay.
presentation. So I didn't have time to say, oh, we should write and we should exchange. And no, it didn't happen. But the fact that there are very few says a lot about the difficulties of trying to find ways to make talented students, or motivated talented students, to follow their own pace. Basically, the age grade lockstep is a huge barrier.
Yeah.
Is a huge barrier.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And next question. Do you have any advice or specific articles or research on how to convince school leadership to support ability-based grouping?
Well, either you agree with the research or you ignore it. If you look at the research clearly, ability grouping is efficient and effective. And as long, and I mentioned the necessary condition, as long as grouping is not just for grouping, and most of the time it is grouping for grouping. Those who are grouped into the, let's say, the advanced group or whatever you call it, will just be given the same curriculum with some little enrichment in diversity and things like that. There will be no compacting. There will be nothing like that. So most of the time, the conditions I defend for appropriate ability grouping are rarely met, as they should be.
Okay.
But the research is clear, It's just that nowadays it's not a priority. I mean, the priority is more about, inclusion and things like that, and equality, and it's putting all students into the same group and things like that. I mean, we could talk a long time about that, but
yes,
if you look at my text, I think I've got good arguments to defend my proposals.
yeah. And at the end of the day, it's about equity that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
And next question, may I ask about identification? What is your best advice on defensible approaches in school settings?
The problem is when you say defensible approaches, I don't know what that means.
I think they mean
that
something they
defended.
could justify.
Well, it depends what you want to do. If it's about ability grouping, one thing is clear to me. Talent, achievement is as important as aptitudes, and even more important. So I would give, as a criterion, more weight to the achievements than to the potentialities. Especially when you know that if the potentiality did not actualize itself by far, I mean, if you have serious underachievement, then these students need something different from what you will offer to high achieving students. So I would put my main marbles in achievements. But also, I mean, there's so many points that could be discussed. But
yes.
yeah, looking at differences in personalities, some students might be high achievers. I mean, I think you are yourself working on 2E, right?
That's right. Yes.
Well, these many twice exceptional students are high achievers, but I mean, they rarely receive an environment that will help them progress at the same time as we try to solve the second E, you know, the exceptional handicap. Oh, and should I say that word? Is it correct?
Well, multi-exceptionalities, disabilities.
Yes, exactly. So
Yeah.
there's a school in Los Angeles, where you've probably heard about it.
Bridges Academy.
Yeah, Bridges Academy is probably the best known. And I visited some years ago in New Zealand. In not the capital, but the main city of New Zealand.
In Auckland.
Auckland. Should I say that?
I don't know if that's where it was.
Well, they were creating. I mean, they were starting a school in Auckland for twice E students.
Yeah,
but
fantastic.
It's so rare and it's so costly that it remains quite a challenge to imagine how to transform that format to more regular school districts.
That's right, absolutely. We're just about out of time. Do you have more? One more question?
No, if we could stop, I would be grateful.
No problem.
My throat is beginning to tell me to quiet.
Yes, that's wonderful. You've persisted and done an excellent job, and it's been absolute pleasure and privilege to have you with us today, Francois. So we will say goodbye for now, and we hope to see you again sometime in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Hopefully. Have a nice day to you as I go have my dinner.
Yes, enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.